Welcome to Gospel Truth with Andrew Wommack, a teaching ministry that focuses on God's unconditional love and grace, sharing the good news through broadcast television and Charis Bible Colleges worldwide. And now, here's Andrew.
Welcome to our Monday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. Today I am continuing a series that I started 3 weeks ago. This is the beginning of my 4th week of teaching on staying full of God. And I tell you, this title is a little, it's not necessarily on topic for some people, but I just name things the way that God spoke it to me. And He spoke to me from Romans 1:21 about things that you have to do to stay full of God, stay full of His love, stay full of His blessing, anointing, etc., and things like this. And so in Romans 1:21, it lists progressive steps that people take away from God. They quit glorifying God, which isn't putting the value on Him that they should, not focused on Him. They quit being thankful, rehearsing all the good things that He's done. And then the third thing is their imagination begins to work against them. Instead of seeing the goodness of God, they see failure. They see all of these problems. And this is what I've been focused on all last week, and I'm going to continue that today on our program here, talking about imagination. I've been through a lot of things showing what an imagination is, how powerful it is, even from Scripture, like in Genesis chapter 11, where the Lord was threatened by the imagination of men. That right there places a high importance on imagination, how powerful it is. And then in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, talking about that our weapons are strong, even to the casting down of imaginations. Again, a reference to how strong an imagination is. And then I made a statement that our imagination, imagination was always spoken of in a negative way, and I wondered if it's so powerful, then why isn't it spoken of in a positive way? And as I was reading Romans chapter 8, verse 24 and 25, I found out that what the Bible calls hope is a positive imagination. Look at this, in Romans chapter 8, verse 24, "For we are saved by hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. For what a man seeth, why doth he yet hope for? But if we hope for that we see not, then do we with patience wait for it." You have to hope in things that you can't see. Once you can see it, then it's no longer hope. And did you know that the definition of an imagination is the process or power of forming a mental image of something not real or present? This fits perfectly what the Bible here is saying about hope. That hope that is seen, it's not hope anymore. So hope is seeing the unseen. You put all of this together, I believe that the Bible calls hope your positive imagination. So anytime you see the word imagination used, it's nearly always talking about the negative side of imagination, but the word hope is talking about the positive side of an imagination. Now that just opens up the door to all kinds of things. There are many, many, many references in the Word of God to hope. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, it says, "Faith is the substance of things hoped for." I was talking about this yesterday, that some people, they discredit hope. They say, well, I'm not just hoping, so I'm believing God. But faith gives substance to what's hoped for. If there isn't hope, if there isn't a positive imagination, if you haven't seen it and conceived it in your imagination, then faith can't bring it to birth. That's really important. I heard Charles Capps one time give this illustration, and it's always stuck with me, but he was telling this story about a guy that lived way out in the woods and only came out of the woods, once every 10 years or something like that. And he lived where there was no electricity, no modern conveniences or anything. So anyway, he came into town. He went to this church service. And at the church service, it was beginning to get hot in there, and so people were beginning to fan themselves. And this usher walks up next to him and just turns this little thing on the wall, and within just seconds, he began to start feeling cold air blow on him. And he was just amazed. So as soon as that church service was over, he went up to that usher and he says, "What's that thing on the wall?" And he says, "What are you talking about?" And he says, "Well, you came over and you turned this thing and I felt this cold air." And he says, "Well, that's a thermostat." And the guy said, "Well, where do you get a thermostat?" He says, "You can get a thermostat in any hardware store." So this guy, before he went back to his little cabin out in the woods, he went to a hardware store. He bought a thermostat. He went and put it on the wall of his cabin. And when it started to get hot, he went over there and turned the thermostat, but he never felt any cold air. And he just was totally disappointed. But see, the thermostat is not the power unit. It's the thing that activates and controls the power unit, the air conditioner itself. Likewise, hope is to faith like a thermostat is to the air conditioning unit. The thermostat itself doesn't make things cold, but it activates that power unit that does cool the building down. Hope itself doesn't set a person free, but hope is where you conceive it. And once you conceive it, if something ever gets really conceived and becomes alive in your imagination, then it's just a matter of time until faith starts bringing that thing to pass. One time my wife and I were going to go buy a car. We had an old car and it was time for it to be replaced. But we weren't emotionally involved in this process at all. It was just a decision that needed to be made. And so we thought, well, we'll go look at a car. And we weren't going to buy a car right then. We didn't have all of our money together. We weren't ready, but we thought we'd just start the process. So we made the mistake of going to a dealership. And I asked this salesman at the dealership, I wanted to just, inquire about how much it was going to cost to get such and such car and all of this kind of stuff. Well, these salesmen, they know the power of hope. They know the power of your imagination. And so I just wanted information. I asked him about a certain car, certain type of engine, how many miles it got per gallon, what the cost of it was going to be, what the payments would be, things like that. And I was just getting this information so that I could, begin to make a decision. Well, this salesman wouldn't have it. He says, "No, you've got to go sit in this car." And he took us out and he said, "Now sit in this car and feel this car. Doesn't this feel good? Doesn't this smell good? And doesn't this look good? Wouldn't you look good in something like this?" And you know what? When I went there, I wasn't motivated at all. I was just doing it because it was a practical thing to do. But after sitting in the car, feeling it, seeing myself in the car, you know what he did? He got my imagination involved. I was concerned about the size of the engine, about the warranty. But salesmen, they don't sell you on all of those things. They may give you some of those facts, but what they want you to do is to drive it around, to feel it, to see yourself driving this car. And what they're doing, they're getting your imagination going. And Jamie and I went there with, we were indifferent about it. We could have waited another year if that's what was necessary. We were just beginning the process. But after sitting in that car, after driving it, feeling the ride of that new car versus our old car. Did you know by the time we left there, I was motivated. My faith was working. I stayed up late that night figuring out how we could afford to buy that car. And everything completely changed. You know why? Because the thermostat changed. The thermostat kicked my faith into gear, and all of a sudden, man, I was praying and trying to believe and figure out how I could get that thing. Now, see, there's a lot of people that are trying to get the power unit to come on, but they never have turned the thermostat. And it's just not working, and they can't understand what's happening. You need to let your imagination begin to start working. And you need to take whatever the goal is that you have. Take something and meditate on it until you can see it. A lot of people, when it comes to losing weight, they go about this in the wrong way. What they do is take a picture of a real fat person or something and put it up there and say, "Man, unless I do something, that's going to be me." And that does provide some motivation, but it's negative motivation. What you really would be better off doing is putting the picture of a real nice, skinny person, or a person that's the right size that you want to be. And you ought to put that up and use a positive motivation and see yourself like that. If you could ever see yourself being skinny, you would be skinny. And I know that there's people watching this right now that think, oh, that's not true. Well, you desire to be skinny, but you don't see yourself that way. Anyway, I don't want to spend my whole program talking about how to lose weight, but I really believe this, that positive motivation, a positive imagination is one of the most important things that you can possibly do. And yet most people use a negative motivation. Most people don't mow their lawn when it's the easiest to mow the lawn, when the grass is not very tall and stuff. But what they will do is wait, and they've got other things that they'd rather be doing, and they just put it off and wait until the grass gets high, and they are afraid that their neighbors are going to say something, their mate is going to say something, and then they'll get out and mow. And because it's so high, it makes all of this mess. You have to wind up raking up all of the thing or catching it incidentally, and it's just a lot more effort. Most people wait until there is some negative motivation. That's what we've been conditioned for. It's the way that this world operates. But a positive motivation is so much better. Look at this about Abraham. This is in Romans chapter 4, and in verse 18 it says, who against hope believed in hope, that he might become the father of many nations. Now remember that hope, I shared out of Romans chapter 8, verses 24 and 25, hope is seeing things that you can't see. That's the same thing that an imagination is called. So hope is a positive imagination. So let's plug that back into here. It says, who against all hope, in other words, in the natural realm, there was no evidence that Abraham could have a child when he was 100 years old and his wife was 91. Everything in the natural was against that, painting a negative picture on the inside. There was nothing positive. But against that negative hope, he used a positive hope. He saw himself the father of many nations when he was 100 years old and Sarah had long passed the time of having children. He saw it. He took what God spoke to him and he saw it and he believed it. And so that's what it's talking about. Hope is the ability to see things in your heart, in your imagination, in a positive way. Who against hope believed in hope that he might become the father of many nations, according to that which was spoken, so shall thy seed be. Here's another great truth, and that is that your positive imagination has to be anchored in the Word. He was believing according to that which was spoken, so shall thy seed be. Those are 5 words that God gave him in Genesis 15. And with 5 words, Abraham was able to believe for a great miracle and have a child when he was 100 years old and his wife was 91. But the Word painted this picture on the inside of him. You know, it goes on to say, and being not weak in faith, he considered not his own body now dead when he was about 100 years old, neither yet the deadness of Sarah's womb. Let me just ask you that if God was to speak to you and tell you that you were going to have a child and you were 100 years old, first of all, most of us, if we were 100 years old, wouldn't even want a child. But let's just put all of that aside and say that this was something you'd been believing for your whole life, and God spoke to you at 100 years old that you were going to have a child. What would most of us do? I can guarantee you the average person, if you felt like God told you that, you would probably go to the doctor and get checked out, find out what your sperm count is, go get your wife checked out. Can she have children? And when he says no, then you'd probably go to the internet. What's the oldest that any person has ever given birth to a child? And you'd research this, and you would get all of this negative stuff that would paint a negative picture on the inside of you. And then you'd go back to God, and God, are you sure? Is this really what you said? And the Lord would say, yes, that's my promise to you. And then you would start trying to believe And you'd say, okay, in the name of Jesus, I believe I'm having a child when I'm 100 years old. And yet, you had this negative picture painted because you've been looking at all of these wrong things. And then you wonder, why is it so hard? The reason Abraham was able to believe is because it says he considered not his own body now dead. You know, the word consider means to study, ponder, deliberate, examine, think upon. Or putting this back into Romans 1:21, the verse that I've been using throughout this whole series, where you have to glorify God and put value and esteem what He says and focus on what He says. Abraham did not focus on the negative. He didn't focus on the doctor's report. He didn't go to the internet and let that limit what he could believe. He didn't even pile up any of this unbelief because he was focused on something else. He was focused only on God, and because of that, the image that was on the inside of him was a positive imagination. It was hope instead of discouragement. Most of us live a lifestyle where we are plugged into this world through television, through the internet, through news medias, papers, and things like this. We have all of this sewage of the world. The negative reports, the bad statements, it's flu season, this is going to happen, that things are getting worse and worse, and we just focus on all of this negative. And what it does, it dulls our imagination from thinking in a positive way. It conditions it that everything's going bad. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And our imagination becomes vain because we aren't focused on the things of God, we're focused on the things of the world. And whether you know it or not, all of these images that you see on television, of course, I'm on television. I'm not against all television, but I'm saying the vast majority of what people watch on television is very detrimental. Even if you could find a decent movie or show, the commercials will kill you. They advertise even toothpaste or anything through sex, and they plant these images. And did you know that you get these images on the inside of you and you conceive it in your heart, in your imagination, and then you're either going to have an abortion or you're going to give birth to those negative images that are going on. Many of you watch movies and stuff about murder and killing and hatred, and what it does is paint an image on the inside of you as this is being normal. You watch these sitcoms about marriages, and I mean, they're just at each other's throat, and they're cutting each other down and doing things and cheating on them behind their back, etc. And that paints a picture, an image on the inside of you as this is normal. Abraham didn't do that. Abraham didn't sit there watching television 4 or 5 hours a day and watching stuff that was contrary to what he believed. But one of the reasons I believe that the Lord told him, Abraham, count the stars that are in the sky, or number the grains of sand on the seashore. I believe that the reason the Lord used those two things for Abraham is because he didn't live in a culture like what we do. He wasn't living inside. He was in a tent. Every day he had to deal with the dust and the sand that was on his feet. And he every single day looked and saw this. He didn't have boots like what I have. He had sandals, and every day he had to deal with the dust that was on his feet. And so during the daylight hours, he was constantly reminded of this is how numerous my children is going to be, as numerous as the grains of sand on the seashore. And then the other example that the Lord gave him says, count the stars in the sky. It's impossible to count all the stars in the skies. There's billions and billions of them. But see, at day, he dealt with the dust on his feet. At night, he wasn't inside with artificial light. He was in a tent, and he probably sat outside and watched the sunset, saw the stars, and as he saw them day and night, he had this visual representation in front of him that fueled his imagination. And day and night, he was constantly saying, this is how numerous my children are going to be. You know, the Scripture doesn't say this, but again, I just believe, based on all of these things, that there was probably, who knows, hundreds, maybe thousands of nights that he looked at the stars, saying, this is how numerous my children are going to be, and he didn't even have any children. And there's probably countless days that as he cleaned the dust off of his feet. He was thinking, this is how numerous my children are going to be. It was specific that God gave him those things. God wanted him to picture in nature, everything was pointing to the promises of God. And it kept the promises of God in front of him. So what he did, he glorified God. He was constantly being reminded of it. He was going back and thinking it. And because of that, his imagination was positive. It was hope. And against the negative hope that the natural things were telling him, he believed in hope. Hope and faith are tied together. You cannot believe for something that you haven't already hoped for. You can't believe for something that you don't have a positive imagination for. You know, I know many of you have heard me give this example before, but I heard about a woman who had real poor eyesight, real thick glasses, and because of this, she had a healing evangelist coming to her church. She didn't want him to pray because she had been disappointed so many times. She didn't want to be disappointed anymore, but he finally cornered her, made her take her glasses off, prayed for her, and then he says, "Now can you see?" So she started to open her eyes. And when she started to open her eyes, he said, "Shut your eyes." And she was wondering, what's he doing? And so the second time he says, "Now can you see?" So she started to open her eyes. And he said, "Shut your eyes." And she shut her eyes, wondering, well, how can I tell if I can see if I can't open my eyes? And the third time he says, "Now can you see?" And she started to open her eyes. And when she did, he says, "I didn't tell you to open your eyes. You've got to see yourself seeing before you can see." He didn't use this terminology, but you've got to see it in your imagination. You've got to have a hope. You've got to see yourself well before you can experience it. And so this woman finally understood what he was saying, and she just kept her glasses off, kept her eyes closed. She started praying in tongues and building herself up on her most holy faith, Jude chapter 1, verse 20. And after a period of time, she's finally, with her eyes still closed, she says, "I've got it. I can see myself seeing." And then this minister said, "Now, open your eyes." And when she opened her eyes were healed, and she could see without her glasses. But see, you've got to see it on the inside before you see it on the outside. Another way of saying that is, you've got to conceive it in your imagination. Your positive imagination is called hope. And faith gives substance to things hoped for. If you don't have hope, if you haven't seen it in your imagination, then your faith doesn't have anything to bring to pass. You've got to conceive it in your imagination. And going back to this teaching, Romans 1:21, the first step is you've got to value God and put the proper value, magnify Him and not the problem. And then you got to be thankful and rehearse all of the good things that God has been doing in your life. If you will do those two things, then your imagination will just automatically become positive. And it will be hope. And faith will start bringing that hope into substance, into reality. Man, this is powerful, what I'm saying. I've still got more to share, but today's my last day to offer this teaching on imagination. Now, I'm going to continue to teach on staying full of God, but the third teaching in this series on imagination, today's the last day. And you can still get my book, my CDs, my DVDs, my study guide, but today is the last day to offer that teaching that is on imagination. So listen to our announcer and please call or write today.
Andrew's complete series titled Discover the Keys to Staying Full of God is available in either a CD album or in a DVD album as seen on TV. This teaching is also available in book form in English or Spanish, or you can get it in a companion study guide. The study guide will deepen your personal understanding and is perfect for Bible studies, home groups, and Sunday schools. Also, you'll be able to print off the questions, outlines, and scriptures from the PDF files on the included data CD. Each of these valuable resources are available for a gift of any amount. Or, if you prefer, these products are available as part of the Staying Full of God package. This package includes your choice of either the CD album or the DVD album, the book, and the companion study guide. The package has a catalog value of $80, but you can receive all these valuable resources today for a gift of $50. Go to awmi.net to see all the ways you can get this teaching. The third audio teaching in today's series is titled The Power of Imagination. It's available for a gift of any amount when you write or call. We encourage everyone to give, but if you're simply unable to afford it, Andrew and his partners will provide this third CD free of charge. This is the last day we'll be offering this teaching, so be sure to respond today. You can use your credit card to order these resources or become a Grace Partner through our website at awmi.net. While you're there, you can discover more product details and download additional free resources. Or call our helpline Monday through Friday from 4:30 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Our helpline number is 719-635-1111. If the lines are busy, remember you can order ministry materials or become a Grace Partner 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at awmi.net. To write us, use the address on your screen. We appreciate your generosity and hope to hear from you today.
She started deteriorating, she started losing weight, and her hair was getting brittle, and her skin started going like translucent, and she lost energy.
We'd had all kind of tests done at the local hospital. They referred us to a specialist children's hospital in London.
And they tried several different extreme methods. The last one was they went to the tube directly into her stomach to feed her. And in my heart I got to the point, well, if the Lord wants her to die for His glory, then so be it. And that's how messed up I was in my thinking, if you like. We got a hold of a free tape from Andrew Wommack Ministries.
And when we listened to that tape, it was like all these truths just came flooding out, and it's like that one tape just opened the whole world up to us.
I went home and went on the internet and downloaded lots and lots of teaching, God Wants You Well series, all free from Andrew's website. And I looked on his schedule and it had one conference in the UK. It said the 16th of March.
The conference was the next day.
My faith at the time was, if only I could get Andrew to pray for her. So we drove up to Walsall where the conference was.
It was a really humble setting in a little room at the back. It wasn't a big show, it wasn't up front, and Andrew and Jamie came in. It was like a 30-second prayer. He just laid his hands on her and he just spoke to her body and told it to be healed in Jesus' name. And then shortly after that, Hannah woke up. I said to her, when you were asleep, Jesus healed you. And this grin came across her face. And she said, oh, good. She goes, now I can eat.
We bought her some chicken and she sat there, took bites of the chicken, swallowed it, took more bites, swallowed it. And we was all just looking at her in amazement, thinking, wow, she's never swallowed food like this before, ever.
When we went back to the hospital to have the tube taken out, the doctor looked at Hannah, looked at these test results and just physically stepped back and looked at her and she said, you're perfect.
As you heard, Ashley and Carly wouldn't have been able to get that teaching if it hadn't been for that free tape and then all of the materials free on the website. I'd like to encourage you, if you haven't become a partner, to consider it. There's many more people that need the touch of the Lord.